Mr. President, thank you for convening this debate. The international community has adopted a vast array of laws and norms to prevent genocide and other war crimes and crimes against humanity. The international legislation comprises the 4 Geneva Conventions and the Genocide Convention. Their observance and implementation is obligatory on all member parties. The concept of the responsibility to protect was advanced by some states and non-governmental organizations during the preparations for the 2005 UN summit. It was a controversial concept from the outset. In the context of the foreign intervention in Iraq, it generated concerns that the concept was designed to open the possibility of intervention in the internal affairs of states. The 2005 outcome document, in paragraphs 138 and 139, consciously restricted the scope of the R2P concept to genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Thus, broadly, the R2P concept merely encapsulated existing international humanitarian law. The primary responsibility for the protection rests with the state itself. Only if the national authorities are unable or unwilling to do so, that the international community can take collective action through the Security Council on a case-by-case basis. This authority exists already under the Genocide Convention. The value addition was its extension to war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, as defined in the Geneva Conventions and accompanying international humanitarian laws. Unfortunately, from the outset, some quarters sought the application of R2P beyond the parameters set out in the outcome document. Secondly, it was sought to be applied in situations where there was no compelling evidence that state authorities were unable or unwilling to act. Some epic interventions, for example in Syria and Libya, were partially justified at the time by the R2P concept, mostly with disastrous consequences. And in other instances, intervention was unilateral, without the explicit and required endorsement of the Security Council. Mr. President, what is most tragic is that while used to justify certain interventions, the R2P concept has failed dramatically to prevent and punish genocide and other crimes when these have actually happened. This is most visible in the failure of the international community to respond to the ongoing genocide in Gaza and other parts of the occupied Palestinian territories. Over 8 months, Israel's military onslaught has killed almost 40,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. 86,000 have been injured. Humanitarian supplies have been obstructed, hundreds of humanitarian workers killed, famine and pestilence stalk Gaza. Indeed, there could be no better illustration of a situation where the international community has the right and indeed the urgent obligation to intervene to stop this genocide and accompanying war crimes. But where are the original, eloquent proponents of R2P? Some have impeded the Security Council from demanding a ceasefire. Some have supplied and continue to supply arms and ammunition to Israel, even after the International Court of Justice has asked Israel and its suppliers to stop this plausible genocide. Even the Resolution 2735 of the Security Council, where Israel is supposed to have accepted a ceasefire plan, remains unimplemented. Israeli military operations continue. The killing goes on. Is this not a situation where the Security Council, acting under the Genocide Convention, reinforced by the R2P doctrine as set out in paragraphs 138 and 139 of the 2005 outcome document, is this not a situation where the Security Council should intervene to offer protection to the victims? The OIC has proposed the creation of a protection force. This must be urgently considered by the Security Council. Mr. President, for the rest, the international community needs to consider how best it can help in preventing other genocides, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, as well as ethnic cleansing. It should take cognizance of situations where entire populations are being brutalized and where genocide is possible. By definition, and by the example of Gaza, it is evident that peoples under foreign occupation are the most at risk. 2 years ago, the organization, which is called Genocide Watch, warned of the danger of genocide in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. An army of 900,000 Indian troops have been deployed to suppress the Kashmiris' quest for freedom and self-determination. Since 1989, over 100,000 Kashmiris have been killed, 20,000 women raped, thousands made to disappear, 13,000 young Kashmiri boys abducted and many of them tortured. Where all the leaders seeking freedom are incarcerated for years. Occupied Kashmir, where extrajudicial killings, collective punishments, torture, and other crimes are a daily reality. Where laws have been imposed to rob Kashmiris of their properties and to induct Hindu settlers from outside, to change the demography of the Muslim-majority Jammu and Kashmir into a Hindu-majority territory. The R2P movement must act now if genocide and ethnic cleansing is to be prevented in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Mr. President, there is an equally serious danger which has arisen in India from the officially sponsored ideology of Hindutva, an ideology which encourages the establishment of a Hindu-only Bharat. Muslims face systematic, officially sanctioned discrimination, violence, and oppression. The law enforcement and judicial machinery is complicit in this oppression. Lynching of Muslims by cow vigilantes and RSS thugs goes unpunished. Calls for genocide against Muslims by Hindutva extremists and even the leaders of the country evokes no punishment, like the threat issued last week by the ruling BJP party leader to kill 200,000 Muslims. The head of Genocide Watch has also warned that a genocide against the 200 million Muslims in India is possible. Mr. President, Pakistan's call for cognizance of the situation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and within India deserves the special attention of the Special Advisor on the responsibility to protect. We look forward to working with her to advance the objectives of international humanitarian law and the provisions of the 2005 outcome document. I thank you, Mr. President.
I'll be brief. We have taken note of SG's report and its contents. India's consistent position on R2P is well known. The responsibility to protect its population is one of the foremost responsibility of every state. The right to life is one of the rights from which no derogation is permitted under any circumstance. The decades of practice have shown that responsibility to protect cannot be used to address all violations of human rights and humanitarian law. Rather, it must only be confined to the 4 identified crimes, that's genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Further practice has also shown that the default response of the international community cannot be coercive measure under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, nor can it be seen as a pretext for humanitarian intervention. The imposition of universal jurisdiction on alleged acts of atrocities committed in the territory of a sovereign state need to be avoided as well. Terrorism today is the greatest threat faced by humankind that exacerbates social tensions, pushing societies towards instability and violence. Having suffered the scourge of cross-border terrorism for decades in which thousands of innocent civilians have lost their lives, India has always been at the forefront of global counter-terrorism efforts. The international community should stand firm on its opposition to terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and reject any attempt to provide any justification for terrorist acts. Mr. President, one delegation has made it a habit of abusing the sanctity of every UN forum by spreading falsehoods. For a country that is encouraging sectarian violence against minorities, sponsoring cross-border terrorism, harboring a deep sense of insecurity, and orchestrated hatred for India and our secular credentials, we expect nothing new from this delegation. Pakistan made a number of futile and unsubstantiated allegations against India, including in relation to Jammu and Kashmir. These do not merit a response as they pertain to matters internal to India. However, my delegation makes it clear that entire Union territory of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh, including the territories under illegal occupation of Pakistan, are and will always remain an integral part of India. A serial violator of minority rights, commenting on the treatment of minorities in another nation is nothing but absurd. The world has been witness to systemic persecution of minorities, including Hindus, Sikhs, Christians and Ahmadiyas by Pakistan. We call on Pakistan to focus on the safety, security and well-being of its minority community instead of engaging in alarmist propaganda. Today we are discussing SG report on R2P and prevention of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. The irony is totally lost on the representative of Pakistan, given their shameful history of committing genocide in what was then East Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh over 50 years back, for which they have not once even offered a modicum of an apology. Let's not forget where Al-Qaeda terrorist Osama bin Laden was found. As an epicenter of terrorism, they have spawned the calls for global ceasefire by sponsoring cross-border terrorism. They have broken each and every principle the UN stands for. I stop here, Mr. President, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation is taking the floor to respond to the inflammatory remarks just made by the delegation of India. This delegation once again refuses to confront the facts presented by my delegation about India's abysmal treatment of minorities, opting instead to present fabricated assertions to this assembly. Mr. President, it is rather ironic for a country to give sermons to others when its minorities, including Christians, Muslims, and Dalits, are publicly lynched at the hands of Hindutva zealots on daily basis. Mr. President, Pakistan condemns any incident of religious violence within our borders. Our leadership swiftly intervenes, condemns the attacks, and ensures swift justice for the perpetrators. In stark contrast, India's leadership appears bent on escalating communal tensions. Can the representative of India justify the recent incident where a BJP leader openly threatened to slaughter 200,000 Muslims? We witnessed India's leadership's unabashed use of anti-Muslim rhetoric for political gain, including their Prime Minister calling Muslims infiltrators during one of his campaign speeches. Moreover, Hindu priests have openly called for genocide of Muslim minorities in India. Mr. President, normally if such incidents occur in any country, swift and scrupulous action is taken to create deterrence. However, India stands out, where the government not only endorses but is complicit in these serious crimes. There is a glaring lack of political will to curb these atrocities in India, unlike Pakistan's unequivocal stance in the similar circumstances. Mr. President, this record against minorities in India has alarmed UN human rights experts, which issued a statement in March earlier this year stating, and I quote, "We're alarmed at the continuing reports of attacks on religious, racial, and ethnic minorities, on women and girls, on intersecting grounds, and on civil society, including human rights defenders and the media in India." Mr. President, we would like to remind the Indian delegation that instead of making vitriolic remarks and fabricating information with no evidence against my country, they should better address the concerns being consistently raised by the UN experts and reverse the dangerous Islamophobic trend in their country. Mr. President, they referred to the events of 1971, which were not a question of genocide, but of India's foreign aggression and attack on national sovereignty and territorial integrity of Pakistan. I would like to request the Indian representative to refer to the General Assembly Resolution 1971 December, which upheld the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Pakistan against the foreign invasion. Mr. President, as far as terrorism is concerned, it is rather ironic for a country that uses terrorism as an instrument of state policy against its neighbors to point fingers at others. It is surprising to see that this country is lecturing on terrorism when it is itself a state sponsor of terrorism, running a global franchise of assassination campaigns, and has abused sanctioned regime in the Security Council to prevent the listing of its nationals involved in various terrorist activities. Mr. President, India knows all too well that its illegal annexation would never be accepted by the occupied people of Jammu and Kashmir. However, it stubbornly refuses to acknowledge a simple fact that the Jammu and Kashmir dispute is neither a constitutional nor an internal matter of India. It has always been and continues to remain an internationally recognized dispute under the relevant Security Council resolutions. It cannot be wished away by India through legal acrobatics. Considering that actions taken by India in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir transgress all limits of legality, human rights, and humanitarian norms, the international community must work towards alleviating the suffering of the people of Jammu and Kashmir by granting them their right to self-determination as enshrined by the UN Charter as well as numerous Security Council resolutions. I thank you, Mr. President.